Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So, pre-spoiler season for the D&D Adventures in the Forgotten Realms Magic the Gathering set continues on, and yes, that was a mouthful to say. Regardless, we've got yet another really exciting spoiler today with a new commander that can combo win with dungeons. And if you're wondering what in the world a dungeon is and how this new mechanic works, well, you probably should go watch my most recent episode because I go through all of it there. And in fact, usually I don't tell people to leave an episode and go watch another one, then come back, but this time, that's actually probably a good idea. On that episode, I go into detail on every single dungeon and talk about exactly how that mechanic works, and I really don't have time to do all that on this episode as well. So if you haven't seen that episode yet, check it out and I'll see you in a couple of minutes. Okay, waiting around. Hey, you're back! Well, I hope that you enjoyed that episode because now you're ready to jump into this one, so let's jump into this one. So the brand new commander that was spoiled is Nadaar Selfless Paladin. Nadaar is a 3/3 Dragon Knight with Vigilance that costs 2 and a white. It has, when it enters the battlefield or attacks, venture into the dungeon. And again, since you definitely have seen my last episode, you know exactly what that means. You're either going to enter the first room of a dungeon or advance to the next room of one. Other creatures you control get +1/+1 as long as you've completed a dungeon. So this commander helps you enter and progress through dungeons. And that can happen either by it entering the battlefield or by attacking. But one of those two things is definitely more abusable than the other. And actually, I just want to thank Eddie for the idea for this episode and this deck by pointing this out. And of course, if I make any mistakes in this episode or in my other episodes, make sure you blame Eddie because it's always Eddie's fault. Regardless, Eddie pointed out that with infinite enter the battlefield triggers from this commander, you win. Simple as that, you just win. Because with infinite ETBs, you keep venturing into and through dungeons and you're getting their room ability triggers. And again, if you don't know what a room ability trigger is, shame on you. I told you to go watch that last episode. Okay, I'll still wait. Okay, you're back now. Now I'm assuming you definitely have watched it. Regardless, with those infinite venture into the dungeon ETBs, you can win the game with a dungeon like Lost Mine of Phandelver. The first room for Lost Mine of Phandelver is a cave entrance that says Scry 1. Then you can either go to the Goblin Lair or the Mine Tunnels, making a 1/1 Goblin or making a treasure token. From the Goblin Lair, you can go to the Storeroom or the Dark Pool. The Storm lets you put a +1 counter on target creature, and the Dark Pool makes each opponent lose 1 life and you gain 1 life. From the Mine Tunnels, you could either go to the Dark Pool or the Fungi Cavern, which says target creature gets -4/-0 until your next turn. And the final room is Temple of Doomthoin, where you're going to be drawing a card. So essentially with infinite ETB triggers, you can go through this dungeon as many times as you need to. Now there is somewhat of a limitation, but obviously there's a workaround to that, but we'll get to that here in a bit. Just know that you can essentially scry infinitely thanks to Cave Entrance, you can get infinite treasure tokens from Mine Tunnels, you can get infinite goblins from Goblin Lair. You can also get infinite counters on all your creatures, you can drain your opponents infinitely, you can also make their creatures infinitely small. And of course, you can draw your entire deck, and that is the problematic part right there, but again, that's not really a problem because I told you we've got a workaround and we'll get to that here in a bit. Just know that drawing your entire deck will not lose you the game. And actually, the vast majority of the time, you won't even need that workaround as long as your opponents have less life than the number of cards that are in your library, which most of the time, that's going to be the case. Basically, your path is usually going to be this. You of course start at the cave entrance and you scry 1, then you go to Mine Tunnels and create a treasure token, then you go to Dark Pool, draining your opponents for 1 and you gain a life, and then you go to Temple of Doomthoin and you draw a card. Then you venture back into this dungeon and do the exact same thing. Obviously, if you really want to, you could just make a giant army and you can get counters on your creatures, but yeah, those treasure tokens are probably going to be better for you. Although again, if you're draining your opponents, it probably really doesn't matter at all. And again, like I mentioned in my previous episode, your opponents really can't interact with dungeons at all. They can't destroy them or touch them, and they can't even move where you're at in them. And if you didn't know that, again, shame on you for not watching that last episode. I did a lot of hard work on that one, okay? Now, obviously, if you want to utilize those other dungeons in this combo, you can. But of course, most of the time, you're not going to have to because this one can just win for you. Now, how in the world do we get infinite ETBs with Nadaar in a mono-white deck? Well, let me tell you about another one of my episodes, and yes, this is the actual thumbnail. Any other Dr. Horrible fans out there? You know, Neil Patrick Harris? Nathan Fillion? No? Just me? Okay. Anyways, this deck is based around what I like to call Hunter Tribal. Fiend Hunter is a 1/3 human cleric that costs 1 white. When it enters the battlefield, you may exile another target creature, and when Fiend Hunter leaves the battlefield, return the exile card to the battlefield under its owner's control. So a hunter like this one temporarily exiles a creature until this goes away. And of course, there are various creatures that do this in different ways, like Changeling Hero. It's a 4/4 Changeling that costs 4 and a white. It says champion a creature. So when this comes into play, you sacrifice it unless you exile another creature you control from the game. When this leaves play, you return that card from exile. So champion a creature is essentially a hunter effect. Essentially, this deck's goal was to loop creatures continuously and just get an infinite amount of ETBs by having creatures come into play and leave play and then bring another one back into play. Now, typically you need 3 hunters to do this, but there are certain hunters out there that can do this with 2. And that would involve hunters like Feldar Guardian, Wispeaver Angel, and Restoration Angel. Feldar Guardian has when it enters the battlefield, you may exile another target permanent you control to return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. And then Wispeaver Angel says when it enters the battlefield, you may exile another target creature you control to return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. So essentially, these two can infinitely exile and bring each other back. And then Restoration Angel can also work, but just with Feldar Guardian. It has when it enters the battlefield, you may exile target non-angel creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under your control. Regardless, with those loops, there are other ETB payoffs in that deck like Impact Tremors, but obviously the payoff for this deck is our commander. Now, unfortunately, since our commander isn't a hunter, it can't be a part of these loops. Or can it? So now let's talk about Panharmonicon. It says if an artifact or creature entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So now instead of 1 hunter trigger, we are getting 2. So with a hunter's doubled up trigger, we can grab our commander and exile it and help it join the loop. Then we get its infinite ETBs and we venture into and through a dungeon as many times as we want. And then our opponents are very drained and very dead. But we can also loop our commander with our hunters with Lumbering Battlement and Glorious Protector. When Lumbering Battlement enters the battlefield, exile any number of other non-token creatures you control until it leaves the battlefield. So this one can exile another hunter as well as our commander along with it. So then our commander is a part of that loop as well. And since our commander is not an angel, it also works with Glorious Protector. When Glorious Protector enters the battlefield, you may exile any number of non-angel creatures you control until Glorious Protector leaves the battlefield. So essentially the same as Lumbering Battlement, but with that non-angel requirement. Regardless, these hunter loops are just one of the ways that we can go infinite with our commander. So let's jump in and talk about another loop with Karmic Guide, Revel Arc, and any sacrifice out that is free, and let's just say Fanatical Devotion. Karmic Guide is a 2/2 flyer with protection from black and echo, but all of that doesn't matter because it has when it enters the battlefield, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. And then Revel Arc is a 4/3 flyer with Evoke for 5 and a white that has when it leaves the battlefield, return up to 2 target creature cards with power 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. And then Fanatical Devotion, like I mentioned earlier, is a free sacrifice outlet, and this one's going to regenerate target creature when you sacrifice a creature. Regardless, again, the most important part is that you can sacrifice a creature for free. So these actually can go infinite on their own without your commander, though they're just spinning their wheels and getting ETBs. It works like this. Let's say Karmic Guide is in our graveyard. We sacrifice Revel Arc, and since it left the battlefield, we get its trigger. So we can return up to 2 target creature cards with power 2 less from our graveyard to the battlefield, and luckily for us, Karmic Guide has 2 power. So Karmic Guide comes back into play, and we get its ETB, and we're going to target Revel Arc with that. So Revel Arc comes back into play. Then we sacrifice Karmic Guide to get it into our graveyard. Then we sacrifice Revel Arc and do it all over again. Now we've got other ways to take advantage of this loop, but the main way that we want to take advantage of it is by having a Fiend Hunter that only has 1 or 2 power, like Fiend Hunter, in our graveyard. Because Revel Arc can keep getting that Fiend Hunter back over and over again when it's getting Karmic Guide back. And because of that, we can keep using the Fiend Hunter to exile our commander, then we sacrifice the Fiend Hunter and we get our commander back. So then we can just keep looping that over and over again to get our commander's ETB as many times as we need to. Now there's actually a way to get around actually needing a Fiend Hunter, and we just need a different sacrifice outlet. The only problem is that sacrifice outlet is Phyrexian Altar, and it's also like a $65 card or whatnot. It's an artifact for 3, and it says sacrifice a creature, add 1 mana of any color. So essentially with this in Revel Arc and Karmic Guide, we can generate infinite mana. And then with that infinite mana, we can just cast our commander, sacrifice it, put it back in the command zone, cast our commander again, sacrifice it, put it back in the command zone, and you see where this is going. With infinite mana and a free sacrifice outlet, we can get our commander's ETB as many times as we need to. So then we can venture into and through dungeons to our heart's content. And since I'm already talking about an expensive card, let's talk about an even more expensive card with Lion's Eye Diamond, which is like $500+. And now I just looked it up, and yeah, it's almost $600 now. Anyways, it's an old card, so I'm going to read its Oracle text. It's an artifact for 0 that says, discard your hand, sacrifice Lion's Eye Diamond, add 3 mana of any one color, activate only as an instant. This expensive card combos with a much cheaper card, which is like around 17 cents right now, Auroch Salvagers. It has to pay 1 and a white, return target artifact card with converted mana cost 1 or less from your graveyard to your hand. So we discard our hand, sacrifice Lion's Eye Diamond for 3 white mana, and then we use that mana to get Lion's Eye Diamond back into our hand. Then we get it in play for free because it costs 0, and then we do that again, and again, and again, and again. So we might not have a hand, but we do have infinite mana. And as long as we've got a free sacrifice outlet in play, we can cast our commander again an infinite number of times and get its ETB an infinite number of times. So if you want to spend an absurd amount of money on a card, make sure you consider Lion's Eye Diamond, and while you're at it, consider Phyrexian Altar. Regardless, with this commander, there's some other things that you should be considering as well. Cards like Ephemerate, Cloud Shift, and Eerie Interlude are going to be very impactful with this commander and with this type of attack. Each of these are essentially blink spells, with Eerie Interlude being a blink spell that can essentially blink your entire team. Again, in a mono-white deck, it's just much easier to abuse that ETB instead of abusing the attack trigger. So cards like these can help you venture a lot faster. And with all these ETBs, you're going to want to consider cards like Ajani's Welcome, Soul Warden, and Soul's Attendant. Ajani's Welcome says, whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. And then the Soul Sisters both say, whenever another creature enters the battlefield, you gain 1 life. So these also count your opponent's creatures as well. And again, no matter what your infinite loop is, even if it doesn't have the payoff of your commander being a part of it, you are getting infinite life. But even without a loop, you're still going to be gaining a lot of life with these cards throughout the game. So maybe consider another win condition like Aetherflux Reservoir. It says whenever you cast a spell, you gain 1 life for each spell you've cast this turn, and pay 50 life. Aetherflux Reservoir deals 50 damage to our creature or player. So yeah, that's another way you can win with this kind of a deck. Cloister Gargoyle is definitely another card that you might want to consider because it's kind of like a second commander for you. It also has the ETB when it enters the battlefield, venture into the dungeon. So it's just a good backup to have in case your commander's been dealt with quite a few times or someone stole it, etc, etc. And I told you that we'd get to this card before with Elixir of Immortality. This is the card that's going to save you when you'd otherwise be drawing your entire deck and losing. It has pay 2 life and tap it and you gain 5 life, shuffle Elixir of Immortality in your graveyard into your library. So essentially with this and infinite ETBs and Lost Mine of Phandelver, we are never going to draw ourselves out. Now we might have to stop our loop to actually get this in play, but that's okay. With an absurd number of treasure tokens and essentially our entire deck in our hand, we're going to have plenty of ways to blink one of our hunters to start things up again. Regardless, like I said before, generally we're not going to need this card because we can just drain our opponents out because our library is going to have more cards than our opponents have life. But now it's time for me to wrap things up and give you my final thoughts on this commander. Yes, there are some crazy awesome things that you can do this commander with some wacky off-the-wall combos. But we actually won't know this commander's true potential until we see more cards in this set. Yes, we've seen all the dungeons, and again, if you haven't seen my last episode on those dungeons, shame on you. Anyways, we've seen all the dungeons, but we haven't seen all the other cards that venture into the dungeon, and we haven't seen all the other things that benefit from completing a dungeon. So make sure you're staying tuned to this channel for more exciting spoilers from this set. Again, official spoiler season starts on Tuesday the 29th, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to be getting some ahead of time because, you know, Wizards does things like this. So make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell notification icon so you're not missing any new episodes. And with that, this show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again, and have a good one.